This 29-year-old mother was overjoyed with her 3 babies. Elizabeth had them for over a year now and enjoyed every moment so far. Raising them as a single mother was difficult, but she would never have it any other way. But then one day, her doctor called to confess an unbelievable mistake. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Elizabeth had a brief fling with someone and found out she was pregnant. Elizabeth was shocked but was determined to keep it. At the hospital, she discovered it wasn't just 1 baby, but 3. Despite the surprise, she knew she wanted to raise them herself. But then, the unthinkable happened. One day, Elizabeth's phone buzzed, and the screen showed her doctor's name. "Elizabeth, I have important news," he said with a serious tone. Elizabeth had no idea what the doctor's news could be about. There weren't any recent examinations or checkups, so this phone call came out of the blue. The doctor's voice was grim on the phone. "Elizabeth, the hospital made a mistake after you gave birth." Elizabeth suddenly felt very nervous. That was over a year ago. "What kind of mistake?" she asked, her voice trembling a little. "I can't tell you on the phone," Dr. Harrison said. His voice sounded serious. "Please come to the hospital right away." Elizabeth's heart started to beat faster and faster. After saying yes, Elizabeth was feeling a bit anxious about what would happen. He really needed her to come to the hospital right away. After hanging up, Elizabeth knew she needed to go to the hospital right away, but also knew she really needed a babysitter for her triplets. She couldn't just leave them all alone. But who could take care of them on such short notice? Elizabeth called her mom. "Mom, I need to go to the hospital," she said. "Can I drop off the triplets at your place?" She tried to keep her voice steady and didn't want her mom to worry. Her mother sounded confused but had no problem with babysitting for a while. Elizabeth put the triplets in the car and drove to her mom's house. Her mom opened the door and asked, "What's wrong?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I don't know yet," she said. She quickly kissed her mom and the triplets goodbye, then quickly hurried back to her car. She had to get to the hospital to find out what was going on. Elizabeth walked into the hospital and checked in at the counter by joining a line of people. When Elizabeth walked into the office, the doctor looked relieved. He stood up from his desk and gestured towards an opposite chair. "Elizabeth, please sit down," he said. His voice was kind, but serious. Elizabeth sat down, feeling more nervous than before. Dr. Harrison sighed deeply. He looked at Elizabeth and began to speak. "After you gave birth," he said, "your triplets were taken to an incubator room." The doctor continued, "You weren't the only one who gave birth to triplets that day." Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea there were other triplets born on the same day. What were the odds? Elizabeth took a deep breath and asked, "What's the mistake?" Dr. Harrison sighed again. "Your triplets were mistakenly swapped," he said. Elizabeth felt her world spin. She looked at Dr. Harrison, unable to believe what she just heard. Her babies had been swapped? How could this happen? Where were they? He continued, "The other woman, who also gave birth to triplets, disappeared from the hospital. She didn't want the babies and ran." Elizabeth's mind was spinning. This had to be a nightmare. How is it possible that she raised different babies than her own? The doctor went on, "While you were recovering, your babies were mistakenly given to an orphanage. The other triplets were taken to you." Elizabeth felt a lump in her throat. She had been raising someone else's babies? Her own babies were in an orphanage? She couldn't believe it. "The older couple you encountered in the waiting room," Dr. Harrison continued, "are the grandparents of the triplets you've been caring for. They're here because they want to know what happened to their daughter's babies she had been raising." Elizabeth felt anger rise in her. "How could this have happened?" she demanded. Dr. Harrison looked at her, his face full of regret. "We're doing everything we can to find out," he replied. Suddenly, Elizabeth realized the most important question. "Where are my babies now?" she asked. Dr. Harrison looked down. "The orphanage took your babies," he said, "but I don't know what happened after that." His voice was full of guilt and sadness. He grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. He scribbled something down. "The people at the orphanage will know more," he said. He handed the paper to Elizabeth. It had a phone number on it. Heir grandchildren without knowing it. Elizabeth took it, her hand trembling. She knew she had to call that number. Elizabeth immediately stood up and left the office. As she walked out, Elizabeth bumped into the other triplets' grandparents. tears running down her face slowly. For a few seconds, she just stared at them. I was raising their grandchildren now, and her babies were somewhere out there. The situation felt so unreal. "I'm so sorry," Elizabeth told the grandparents. Her voice was shaky but sincere. "I want to help make this right, but first I need to find out what happened to my triplets." Rushing outside for some fresh air, Elizabeth took deep, calming breaths. With shaky hands, she retrieved her phone from her pocket and started looking. The first call had to be to her mother. The news had to be shared. Her mother's shock echoed through the phone, but even in her surprise, she tried to calm Elizabeth down. "Don't worry, honey," she said. "I can take care of the triplets for now. We'll figure this out together." Her words offered some comfort, but Elizabeth knew a difficult journey lay ahead. "Just call the orphanage, sweetie," her mother encouraged. "You need to know where this leads. You need to find your babies." She knew her mother was completely right. It was time to make the call and start searching for her babies. Elizabeth retrieved the piece of paper from her pocket. The number was scrawled in Dr. Harrison's hurried handwriting. She dialed each digit carefully. A man's voice came over the phone. Before he could finish his greeting, Elizabeth blurted out, "Where are my babies?" There was a pause on the other end. Then, in a softer tone, the man said, "You're Elizabeth, aren't you?" It was clear he knew why she was calling them. Elizabeth listened as the man started to explain. "I was the one who called the doctor today," he said, "but I wanted to speak to you personally, Elizabeth." His voice was kind and calm, but Elizabeth could tell he was nervous. He continued, "There was a woman who has been trying to contact us, asking about the triplets. At first we didn't know who she was, but after some time, we realized that that woman must be their mother." Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest. Could it be possible? Was it her? "The woman didn't show up the first 2 times," he said, "but on the 3rd time she did. She seemed very nervous, but calmed down once inside. However, she started saying these weren't her babies, that she had seen her babies shortly after giving birth, but these triplets weren't hers. I contacted my liaison at the hospital," the man added. "It took us a few hours of digging, but eventually we learned the truth. The triplets had been switched at birth." The details of the mix-up were becoming clearer with each revelation. Relief washed over Elizabeth, but it quickly mingled with a wave of anxiety. "The triplets are perfectly healthy," the man reassured Elizabeth. "They're in a lovely, caring home right now. You can meet them and take them home if you'd like." Elizabeth was about to meet her children. After hanging up the phone, Elizabeth stood there for a few seconds. Then she remembered the other triplets' grandparents and decided to return to them inside. Elizabeth invited them to come with her to the place where her triplets were. With the older couple in tow, Elizabeth went to the place where her babies were. Seeing them for the first time filled her with overwhelming joy. After speaking with the caregivers, gratitude swelling in her heart, she was ready to take her babies home. Elizabeth led the grandparents to her mother's home where the triplets awaited. The moment they laid eyes on their grandchildren, a bond was formed. Tears of joy and relief were shed, shared glances of understanding exchanged. As the weeks and months rolled by, the older couple and their daughter found themselves increasingly relying on Elizabeth's guidance with the triplets. Her wisdom and patience became their support system, her understanding their relief. A deep, enduring relationship formed among them, unified by the shared love for the children. In an unexpected twist of fate, Elizabeth found herself the mother of 2 sets of triplets. Her life was a whirlwind of feedings, diaper changes, and lots of love. Despite the challenges, she wouldn't change a thing. She loved every moment, every smile, every giggle, and every late-night lullaby. Her heart was full,